Imagine waking up in a country where, for the last 30 days, nobody has held the final authority to approve a decision, sign a release, or confirm an emergency action. Not a villain takeover, not a dramatic coup, but something far quieter. The everyday absence of one signature that holds an entire system together. A single month of that silence can bend the direction of an economy, and the consequences don't arrive with explosions. Creeping, silent, invisible. And by the time people realize what's happening, the damage is already locked in. Every nation gives the impression of being powered by visible faces, leaders who address the public, meet diplomats, deliver promises. But behind that facade exists a far more delicate architecture. Nations run on chains of approvals, institutional rhythms, and a constant reinforcement of confidence. Confidence is not a feeling here, it's a currency. Ministries depend on quick decisions, banks depend on predictable policy, businesses depend on signals from both. The public depends on all three. Remove the center of that circulation for even a short period, and the system doesn't explode. It slows, stutters, and then stalls. That stall is what's known as a power vacuum. A power vacuum doesn't always appear as total chaos. Sometimes it is simply the absence of someone who can say yes or no with finality. A country's administrative machine looks massive, but its most crucial gears turn only when decisions flow downward without interruption. Secretaries draft proposals, committees evaluate, advisors recommend. But the machine waits for the highest node. The leader's approval is the final stamp that converts discussions into action. When that node disappears, whether by collapse of authority, sudden exit, or disputed legitimacy, the rest of the machine keeps running for a while out of habit. Then it begins to slow, then hesitate, then freeze, and that freeze is where economies start degrading in ways the public cannot see immediately. History has documented this process more than once. The Soviet Union in 1991 wasn't just a political breakdown. It was the moment when the central authority, already weakened, lost functional control. As the final decision makers became uncertain or bypassed, the chain of command inside ministries stopped aligning. State enterprises didn't know who would approve subsidies. Regional authorities started acting independently. Money lost direction. Production dropped because the directives that synchronized factories were no longer coherent. Within weeks, the economy wasn't collapsing through protest or violence. It was dissolving through confusion. Libya in 2011 faced a different version. When leadership dissolved abruptly, institutions that were built to take orders from a single top-down system found themselves without a reference point. Oil production didn't stop because wells were destroyed. It stopped because contracts suddenly became unrecognizable. International partners didn't know whom to trust. Payments hung in limbo. And inside the country, local administrators waited for directives that never came. The economy didn't fall because of one dramatic event, but due to thousands of missed decisions that collectively drained momentum. Argentina in 2001 wasn't a battlefield. It was a power vacuum in the financial sphere. Leadership churned, and with every change, the chain of authority weakened. The public couldn't identify who controlled policy. Banks paused, unsure which orders were binding. Capital fled. Businesses hesitated to restock because currency policy was unclear. The crisis didn't ignite from any single spark. It was the cumulative effect of an uncertain center, a vacuum that stretched long enough for the economy to lose its floor. These examples reveal the same hidden mechanism. When the final authority disappears, the combined hesitation of institutions behaves like a slow-motion collapse. It begins in government offices where files wait for signatures. Each file holds decisions that others depend on. Budget allocations, emergency fund releases, regulatory confirmations. When these freeze, banks interpret the silence as risk. Without clarity, they pause credit lines, postpone large transactions, and demand higher guarantees. Investors read the bank's hesitation and step back. Businesses that would have expanded hold onto cash instead. Suppliers delay shipments because payments might not be honored promptly. The machine is still running, but the lubricant, confidence, starts to thicken. Inside the public, this silence creates a psychological gap. People sense something off even before they understand the details. ATM withdrawals increase a little. Families postpone big purchases. Some convert savings quietly. Small patterns intensify. As businesses notice the drop in consumer activity, they cut back orders, which then reduces factory output. Factories reduce overtime, then reduce staff. Employees who lose income spend less. The system folds inward, becoming narrower and slower with each cycle. Every hesitation at the top produces a small pause at the bottom. Individually, these pauses feel harmless. Collectively, they form a chain reaction where nobody wants to act first. The economy becomes a room full of people waiting for someone else to move. And without leadership, nobody does. Why does the 30-day mark appear so frequently as the breaking point? Not because of superstition or political narratives, but because of institutional tempo. Most economic systems operate on monthly cycles. Salary disbursement, debt servicing, business renewals, government fund releases. Within 30 days, almost every sector expects at least one confirmation from leadership, whether direct or indirect. When these don't arrive, the first cycle stretches beyond normal. That stretch creates stress. Psychologically, people can tolerate uncertainty for a few days. A week makes them uneasy. 2 weeks makes them alert. By the fourth week, uncertainty feels like a pattern rather than a pause. That's when behavior changes. Financial markets follow similar rhythms. They operate on expectations measured in days. If clarity doesn't return in a month, analysts shift from temporary warning mode to long-term risk mode. Prices adjust, capital flows reverse, institutions begin preparing for a prolonged vacuum, which deepens the vacuum further. Economically, the 30-day threshold corresponds with liquidity cycles. Banks need predictable inflow and outflow to maintain stability. If leadership stalls for a month, banks assume policy instability for the next quarter. They tighten positions, and once they tighten, businesses feel the squeeze instantly. Institutional trust can survive a week of silence. It cannot survive a month. In today's world, these patterns can emerge without dramatic events. Leadership voids aren't always created by collapse. They can appear through prolonged election disputes, caretaker governments with restricted powers, constitutional deadlocks, or even administrative transitions delayed by legal challenges. No need to point fingers at any specific country. Modern governance is complex everywhere, but the economy is indifferent to political explanations. It reacts only to clarity or the lack of it. A delayed handover doesn't show up as breaking news. It shows up as pending signatures in ministries that handle everything from national procurement to import approvals. Without clear authority, shipping containers sit longer at ports. Importers take extra days to confirm payments. Exporters wait for updated documentation. Small delays merge into larger ones. For a globalized economy where supply chains move in hours, a 30-day pause at the top radiates into thousands of micro delays across sectors. Caretaker governments can maintain routine administration, but they can't usually take major financial decisions. That limitation means policy questions accumulate without resolution. Investors who are waiting for clarity stretch their deadlines. Some quietly withdraw. Development projects that should roll over to the next phase hang in suspension. Even neutral scenarios, like a simple transition taking longer than expected, produce the same invisible tension. And when that tension expands, it reaches the individual. One morning, salaries that usually arrive on the 1st come on the 3rd. Not alarming, just unexpected. The next month, they arrive on the 7th. A colleague mentions that his payment got split into parts. Government employees hear that some allowances are delayed due to procedural holdups. Banks quietly reduce cash availability in ATMs. The machines still work, but withdrawals per card shrink. People don't panic yet, but they feel the shift. In stores, items that rely on imports start thinning. A small electronics shop shows out of stock for models that were always available. Not because demand increased, but because shipments were stuck awaiting approvals. Pharmacies begin rationing certain medicines, explaining that the next batch hasn't cleared customs. Grocery stores raise prices slightly on imported items to compensate for uncertainty in supply. Customers grumble but pay. Restaurants adjust menus because specific ingredients are unavailable. Schools send notes to parents explaining that annual maintenance budgets are under review. Construction sites pause because material deliveries are irregular. These disruptions don't announce themselves. They seep in, one inconvenience at a time. Inside households, the 30-day vacuum becomes a lived experience. Parents discuss whether to postpone buying new school shoes. Someone decides to skip a weekend outing to save fuel. A family that usually pays all bills on the first week shifts to the 3rd week. Rent negotiations get tense because landlords are unsure about upcoming months. Tenants ask for more time. Everyone becomes slightly more conservative. These small shifts accumulate into a national slowdown. Savings accounts that once felt safe now feel vulnerable. People start withdrawing modest amounts as a precaution, but when thousands think the same, it affects cash circulation. Banks respond by limiting daily withdrawals. Some ATMs run dry for a few hours. Social media notices. Rumors circulate. Even if the government assures stability, the absence of clear leadership makes reassurance feel incomplete. Businesses start running numbers more frequently. A textile store reduces inventory to avoid being stuck with unsold stock. A logistics company delays vehicle upgrades. A manufacturing unit scales back production to match uncertain demand. Employees feel the tremors in the form of fewer shifts, reduced overtime, or temporary closures. Freelancers get fewer calls. Transport workers see fewer loads. Every layer of the economy contracts inward, mirroring the leadership void above. The longer the vacuum persists, the more the system reorganizes itself around caution rather than confidence. International partners slow their engagement. Agreements get postponed. Foreign investors wait for clarity before renewing operations. The flow of global capital, usually fluid and silent, shifts away in anticipation of risk, not permanently, but long enough to leave noticeable gaps. Within households, conversations become more pragmatic. People track news with unusual attention. Even minor announcements turn into big discussions because everyone is trying to interpret signals. Without a clear leader, the public doesn't know whose words reflect actual policy. This lack of direction is the most personal part of the power vacuum, the feeling of being in a system where nobody is truly steering. If the vacuum ends before the 30-day mark, recovery is easier. The machine can restart because the gears haven't locked up yet. But if the absence continues beyond that period, the slowdown becomes structural. Some businesses that paused operations might not reopen. Some savings withdrawn in caution might never return to banks. Some investors who stepped back might redirect funds elsewhere. The vacuum's legacy lasts longer than the vacuum itself. In the midst of all this, everyday life becomes a series of small adjustments. People start timing grocery trips to avoid crowds near ATMs. Companies instruct employees to avoid unnecessary expenditures. Families prioritize essentials. The city feels slightly slower, not dramatically, but noticeably. Taxis that once waited for 5 minutes now wait for 15. Shopping malls feel thinner. Cafes lose their usual buzz. None of this appears as a headline, yet it shapes daily reality more than any major announcement. When leadership finally returns, whether through elections, negotiated transitions, or restored authority, the system doesn't instantly revert. Decisions resume, but confidence doesn't snap back like a switch. It returns slowly, in layers. Ministries catch up on pending files. Banks review their tightened positions. Investors assess stability. The public watches cautiously. The machine restarts, but with the memory of the stall. In the end, the most striking truth about a 30-day leadership void is how quietly it transforms the country. Not through dramatic collapse, but through hesitation. Not through visible crisis, but through the absence of certainty. A nation is a system that responds to clarity, and when clarity disappears for long enough, the system reshapes itself around uncertainty. That reshaping, once it begins, becomes the real story of the power vacuum economy.